for that, I guess. But like at the same time, Luka Doncic had the worst game of his career against the Raptors.
Yeah.
Steph Curry, not a career, sorry, season. Steph Curry had the worst game of his season. Joel Embiid just had two bad scoring games. So I'd personally take that over, a couple role players going off every night. That's fine for me. Like, I'd rather take the superstars out of the game the best you can. And that's kind of Nick Nurse's philosophy. And I think as of late, the results kind of speak for themselves. So yeah, like Korkmaz, good job for you. But like I made the point last week, which is
Yeah.
that strategy, yeah, in regular season games, a guy like Korkmaz, a guy like Danny Green, Mike Scott, they're gonna hit some threes on you, and they're gonna not feel too out of place because they're a bit more prepared and whatever. But down the stretch, last 5 minutes of a game, or in the second round of the playoffs, the third round of the playoffs, I don't trust your role players to beat you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
to me, that strategy is fine because it's kind of playing the long game at where if I'm in the third round of the playoffs playing these teams and Korkmaz beats me, then that's fine to me. Like I just feel like it's unlikely that it happens in those type of scenarios. So I'm not too mad about, it happening in the regular season.
Yeah, and I mean Philadelphia. We talked about it on Sunday how their role players are the issue with that team, and that team is a team that we've said it before. They have five guys in that starting lineup who are just as good as any other starting five in the league, and that's what makes Philadelphia so good. It's just their lack of depth when things get to the nitty gritty in the playoffs and late in the season. That lack of depth starts to hurt them. But tonight it didn't hurt them. I mean, Korkmaz did well. Shake Milton hit a huge three to end the game. We'll get into that a bit later. I wanted to quickly talk about Fred VanVleet. Because Fred VanVleet, I mean, he did struggle shooting the ball, right? But he, Oren, literally did everything else you could ask for him. He rebounded well. He got guys involved offensively. You look at the box score, you look at his shooting stats. I mean, they're not all that great, but he was an absolute demon defensively. It felt like he had 7, 8, 9, 10 steals tonight. He did end with two, and I wrote this in all caps, Oren. He had 4 blocks.
Yeah.
What 6-foot guard? What 6-foot guard, Oren, is getting you 4 blocks? He's barely 6 feet. I don't care about NBA measurements, but Fred has that quiet, dog in him, where his effort can almost, never be questioned. I mean, maybe he learned that from Kyle Lowry. I mean, we saw it. He had it. He had that trait to him in college. But yeah, he has that Lowry attribute where even when he doesn't shoot all that well from the floor, he can affect the game in 5 other ways. What did you think about Fred?
Yeah, and I think
Fred has
we're
that
gonna get into
quiet.
his all-star kind of snub
Yeah,
maybe later, or we can do it now if you want. But I totally agree that he affects games no matter if he's scoring or not. So like the 4 blocks thing, I think Fred talked about it earlier this season because most of the time it's him getting steals basically, but it's when they're on their way up. So they
yeah,
call it a block. But Fred was saying how he wishes they called it a steal because he would lead the league in steals if they did pretty clearly. And yeah, that's ridiculous. Basically, 6 steals in one game is pretty unheard of. So defensively, I agree with you. He was really good. I'm gonna highlight one clip where he digs the ball from Embiid. But I also feel like I should say that the starters in general were, you talked about the plus minuses. I think the starters were the reason that the Raptors lost. The
mhm,
bench kind of gave them something. Boucher, Davis, those guys gave them something, but Anunoby was disappointing tonight. Powell was okay. Fred's scoring was pretty disappointing. We should get into Siakam because I thought he was the best player on the floor for the Raptors. But yeah, like, um, I mean, I think we should just get into the All Star thing right now. Do you want to say your thoughts on it? Because I'll let you go ahead.
yeah. I mean, it was unfortunate. I mean, seeing Shams come out with that tweet because you already know Shams and Wojnarowski are going to come out with the tweets before the actual announcement, and then put a little, sources in italics at the top so they don't get fined by the NBA. But no, it was sad. It was sad to see, no Raptor in the All Star game. We're not used to this. I mean, throw it all the way back to the Chris Bosh days, and then to the Lowry and DeRozan, and then to Lowry and Siakam, and now we're here with a brand new team. We even had Kawhi make it a couple years ago for Toronto. it's unfortunate. I mean, it's unfortunate for Fred. I feel like he was one of those guys that definitely deserved it. There was also, this is one of those things where, with the All-Star where I felt like there's snubs all over the place, literally all over the place. And I think that speaks to the depth, at least the All-Star depth of the NBA. I mean, Devin Booker, Oren, didn't even make it on the Western side, which I think was absurd. Chris Paul made it. He was the representative for the Phoenix Suns, but I think they should have had two representatives. If anything, maybe had Devin Booker in there. Anthony Davis probably won't make it for LA due to injury, so maybe Devin Booker gets thrown in there. But I mean, I love Zion, and I'm a Duke Blue Devil fan. I'm wearing this for a reason, and I love seeing Zion in the game. I mean, entertainment-wise, why wouldn't you want to see a guy like Zion in the game? But come on, like, you can't reward a 13-17 Pelicans team by getting them an All-Star in. Meanwhile, guys like Devin Booker and even like guys like Mike Conley, who really aren't talked about at all, but the Jazz have been the best team in the NBA, I think, by a mile this year. They deserve, I think, if there's a team that deserves 3 All-Stars, it might be them, obviously, other than Brooklyn. But, I mean, there's so many guys. Fred didn't make it. Jeremy Grant didn't make it. Who else am I forgetting, Oren?
In the East, we got Trae Young didn't make it.
Young.
We got Bam and Jimmy didn't make it.
Goodness.
Bam, I thought. Anyways, yeah. Yeah, like, I think, I do agree with you. There's just so many good players. I haven't been on the, like, harping on Fred that much this year because, like, I do think he's the most deserving Raptor if we got one. But at the same time, like you said, there's so many guys who are right in the same, like, category as Fred. And I will say that the advanced stats pretty crazily favor Fred. I was looking at, like, Raptor today, which is a 538 stat, and he's, like, so high. And I think a large part of it is because he really doesn't turn the ball over much. He's a playmaker averaging like 6 assists, and he doesn't turn the ball over. And then also the defensive stats, like the stocks, So yeah, I think he's been the best Raptor start to finish this season, but there's a vote splitting that will happen when you have Pascal Siakam and Kyle Lowry, who respectively, Lowry is a guy who the coaches respect a lot and is just a veteran who made it the past like 5 years or something. And then Pascal is like offensively just more gifted than Fred VanVleet, and just like, those two guys I would say are both better players than Fred. They're not having better seasons, but they are, I would say, better players on the whole. So I can't be too mad about it, because when you get off to a 2-8 start, there's no excuses. Those are the things that it comes back to hurt you in these all-star discussions for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And now that, we're talking about Fred, I mean, the guy who I think the Raptors might have needed in this one, and who's been a topic of discussion in games where they don't have him, where he's out for injury, has been Kyle Lowry, where Nick Nurse essentially said that Lowry would be back for tomorrow's game. What do you think is Kyle Lowry's importance? I think we've all seen the stat where Toronto's 16-0. I mean, previous to this game, they're now 16-1 without Lowry in their last 17 games. But what did you think? Did you think Toronto needed a guy like Kyle Lowry in this one? You think it wouldn't have really mattered? What did you think?
Yeah, I think it would have mattered in the sense that a lot of guys just didn't have the juice tonight. Like, guys just weren't seeing the ball go down. And usually what happens when, Fred's cold and OG's cold, what happens is that Lowry takes over a little bit. He's not a guy who like takes over from the start of the game. He's the opposite. He likes to get his teammates involved, but he is the guy that when you're down and everyone else is struggling to score, he gets super aggressive and gets to the line or gets a timely like transition pull-up three. So the Raptors, they lacked a little scoring punch tonight, and I think, replacing Bembry, who doesn't really score at all, with Lowry would have definitely been nice. I want to talk like a little bit about, though, in terms of like this team as like a real contender in the playoffs. I do worry about the fact that they seem to rely a lot on like getting steals and running in transition. Like, would you agree with that when when they're doing those two things, they're usually going on runs and kind of winning the game. But when it gets bogged down to a half court game, especially against a team like Philly, that's when the Raptors worry me, and we know teams will do that in the playoffs.
No, for sure. I literally wrote down in my notes that the Raptors were actually forcing turnovers in this game, and I think a change that people have noticed, a change that people have noticed in the last 3-4 games is the fact that, you know, since the Raptors have gone small, it just seems like there's a lot more chaos, a lot more disruption defensively that they're causing. But the problem was they're causing all these turnovers. It's just nothing was coming out of it. I mean, midway through the fourth quarter, the Raptors had 13 turnovers caused, and they had 5 points to show for it. And that probably speaks a lot to Philadelphia kind of getting back, turning it back into a half-court game, and then making Toronto score on them. And then also Toronto's just missing shots on top of that. So it's like you're creating all these turnovers, and when you're not making anything out of it, because remember, turnover is an extra possession for your offense, and when you're not making anything out of that, I mean, you're not going to win a lot of games.
Yeah, it's pretty funny looking at the box score. Siakam 3 steals, VanVleet 2 steals and 4 blocks, Powell 3 steals, and Bembry 2 steals. So those are your 4 starters, and Baines 2 steals. So yeah,
exactly, yeah. And it's like you go all the way down. It's like 2, 2, 2, 3, 4. It's like all these turnovers were caused, and it's like, why are you only able to get 10 points off turnovers, whereas the Philadelphia 76ers only forced 10 turnovers and they had 23 points?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when a team has 19 turnovers and you're only getting 10 points out of it, that is not good. That's 19 extra possessions where you only scored 10 points.
That's also where Kyle helps, where he's their best playmaker in transition. But I'm just worried the Raptors are relying a little too much on the transition and the steals, but we'll see. I'm not sure. It's too early to say.
Yeah, I quickly wanted to mention the weirdest play of the game, Oren. I think everyone's going to remember this one, at least tonight, which was the Aaron Baines. I call it the Aaron Baines play. It was just completely strange. I mean, it started off, right, with Baines getting the ball, losing the ball mid-jump shot, right? It was one of those plays, Oren, where if you've ever played basketball and you don't know, like your brain is telling you to shoot, but then your body's like, no, I want to pass it. So he loses the ball kind of mid-jump shot. Obviously, he refuses to touch it because of a potential travel call. Embiid dives on it, gets it, throws a low pass that gets bobbled. Siakam recovers it, hands it off to a cutting Baines, big dunk. It was just the biggest WTF moment of the game. I didn't really know what the hell was going on with that. But it was good that the Toronto Raptors kind of recovered on that one. Did you enjoy that one?
That was amazing. Like, honestly, who was he trying to pass to? That's my question. Like, I get, like, yeah, it did look like that, but who would he possibly have been trying to pass to? It was like the end of the shot clock. Yeah, it was the end of the shot clock, so I don't get why he wouldn't have shot that. But okay, all jokes aside, real quick, this is more lift than Baines was getting at the start of the season. So that's actually a positive. Like, he took off from pretty far for him, like, relatively. I was like, wow, this guy actually jumped pretty far for that dunk. So that's kind of encouraging that he has his legs back under him a little bit. But it felt like, for sure, like, when someone disappoints you a lot and then you, like, give up on them and then they, like, come back in your life and, like, they changed,
Oren, let me tell you something. This was, probably it's probably going to end up one of the weirdest plays of the season for the Raptors. I mean, it's good that it ended off really well. I mean, it sparked an 8-0 run for Toronto, but obviously, again, they couldn't get it done near the end of the game. I wanted to talk quickly about Joel Embiid in this game. I mean, this is the second straight, game, Oren, where, Joel Embiid didn't really shoot all that well from the field. I mean, on Sunday, he shot 6 for 20. I mean, he had a bunch of free throws attempted. Same thing with this game. He didn't really shoot well, but had a bunch of free throws attempted. He was 3 for 13 tonight. People loved at least giving that moniker to Marc Gasol, the Joel Embiid stopper. But I think we're just starting to realize that Nick Nurse just develops very good game plans versus superstars. And one of those superstars is Joel Embiid. This is a guy that, has led in the MVP race. And he's shot, let me do the math really quick, 9 for 33 in the last 2 games. So that's a positive for Toronto. What did you think quickly about Joel Embiid's games? Because I know you wanted to get into some clips.
Yeah, so I think we might as well get into this clip I have.
Yeah.
Overall, I think this was an encouraging 2 game stretch in terms of how these teams match up, because you would think going into it, okay, the Raptors like to play really small. Philly's the one team in the East with a real post-up threat in Joel and Ben Simmons, who's also a post-up threat. Maybe they just can't match up to them. But I mean, apart from Nurse starting small, which I didn't get because it just didn't work last game, it didn't work again this game. Baines deserves a lot of credit, man. Like, I think the nice thing we figured out is that Baines is not a starting center, but he is a situational center against guys like Joel, who are not quick, really, who don't really shoot the 3, but who really are big and strong and will post like just put you down in the post. Baines is a nice positional, strong defender. So I want to give credit to Baines for that, because I thought he did a really good job on Embiid. That's not the clip I'm talking about, but the clip I wanted to show was one where Boucher was actually on Embiid. And even if we don't have the clip, I'll just mention it because Boucher also deserves credit, because he's getting minutes where he's the only 5 against Embiid.
Yeah.
And he's having to battle Embiid in the post, and you would think he can't do that. Last season, he couldn't do that, and he didn't play in the playoffs because he was just too matchup dependent. Sure. But now what we're seeing is Boucher is at least giving his teammates a few more seconds to come and double. He's like positionally being in the right position where he's playing Embiid to the center rather than the baseline. He's holding his ground for a few seconds, and there was one clip where he just held his ground for 4 or 5 seconds. Embiid couldn't really get a position on him, and then Fred came and dug it out. So that was, both of the centers I thought did a pretty decent job on Embiid. But Embiid also did a good job, just even though he wasn't always rewarded for the assist, he was just making the pass out of the double quickly enough for him to get the soccer assists.
No, for sure. And I think
hockey assist.
Hockey assist. But I do think, Oren, one of those things with Embiid is that I said it on Sunday, like when you can't get in a rhythm offensively and you can't get the ball 2 or 3 straight possessions without a team blitzing you with double teams, I mean, you're going to struggle a little bit. You saw how exhausted Embiid looked at the end of the game there. And a lot of that just had to do with him kind of just I guess you could say a lot of the offensive kind of load fell on him, just in terms of each possession almost starting with Embiid and then ending in a Danny Green shot or in a Korkmaz shot. But I think Doc Rivers for Philly kind of wanted to make it a focal point for most possessions while Embiid was on the floor, to start with Embiid and then seeing what he can do after that. We didn't really get a big Ben Simmons game like we did on Sunday. He was 5 for 11 with 15 points. Good all-around game for Ben Simmons, 9 rebounds, 7 assists, but that's Ben Simmons for you. That's just around his per-game average. So shout out to him really quick. But I quickly wanted to get into one more player. So you got into Aaron Baines, who I thought, played really solid defensively. I want to talk about one more guy, and that was DeAndre Bembry. And DeAndre Bembry is a guy that we constantly keep bringing up. But I think, in terms of all players on the court for Toronto, I thought he was one of the better players on the court, a guy who just looks like he fits perfectly into what Toronto wants to do. Played 24 minutes tonight. Again, was a -8, kind of like the rest of the starters, but 4 assists, 4 rebounds, a couple steals, a block. Didn't really foul all that much. Didn't shoot the ball all that much. He's one of those guys for Toronto where I think the deeper you get into the season, Oren, they're going to kind of rely on Bembry a lot more. He's kind of staked his claim in the starting lineup. Bembry doesn't score a lot, Oren. Did you like what he did other than scoring tonight?
For sure. I think it says a lot about him that Nurse trusts him to play with the starters when Kyle's out, because you're kind of stepping into that backcourt role beside Fred VanVleet. And it's pretty nice that Bembry's kind of asserted himself in the rotation. I was thinking about, Toronto compared to a team like Boston in terms of their top 8. And Bembry's another guy who you just would trust in a playoff series, and that's kind of nice. The Raptors only had 7 last season, and it hurt them against Boston. And the fact that Bembry's kind of your 8th, and I would trust him in a playoff series, that's really nice. Like he even yeah, we talked about him quite a bit, but I don't have much to add.
No, 100%. Obviously, Tobias Harris ended the game really well. We don't want to get into all-star snubs again, but that's another guy who, for Philadelphia, who's looked like one of the better teams in the East. He's probably a guy that maybe should have got a look. I guess maybe he's in that Chris Middleton range of all-star snubs where it's like, your team hasn't really done all that well recently, so you kind of got snubbed. But Tobias Harris had a really good game at the end there. I quickly, Oren, wanted to get into the turning point of the game, the wrap-up turning point of the game, I should say, where Shake Milton kind of stuck the dagger in Toronto's heart as they were making a big run back. There's about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. The play started with a Danny Green steal on Fred VanVleet. It just looked really bad that Toronto just couldn't kind of corral possession here. The ball started with Danny Green off the steal, goes from Tobias, and then eventually to Ben Simmons at the top of the floor. And then that obviously led to Bembry. If you watch the play, Oren, like kind of in the back of what's going on, not really following the ball, you see Boucher and Baines. They don't really know what's going on. Both of them are kind of guarding the same guy. They look lost. There's a miscommunication there. And then the ball quickly gets swung. Ben Simmons is obviously a smart enough playmaker where he knows this is happening. The ball gets swung. It ends up with Milton, and Bembry's kind of playing between both Simmons and Milton. Simmons gives him a quick stutter drive. Milton hits a huge three. That just deflated Toronto completely.
That's Siakam,
and it was unfortunate, I think, for Toronto because that kind of was the dagger, like I said. Oren, did you like how kind of Shake Milton kind of put on his boots tonight and played tonight, or do you think that was just a play that really shouldn't have been?
Yeah, that's more of an indictment on the Raptors. Like, you see in the clip, Siakam and Baines both kind of pointing someone over, but it didn't feel like they were like being as angry as they should have been. Like, honestly, you gotta like scream and be way more aggressive because it wasn't like the Sixers noticed it quick and did it right away. Like, I was watching the TV going like, is someone gonna come over? Because Siakam just has 2 guys right now. 5 seconds goes by and no one comes over. And that's the moment when like the Raptors absolutely deserve to lose that game after that. It was just like your execution can't be that poor in the last 5 minutes. Like, this is a team that has been really bad in the clutch all season compared to last season when they were one of the best clutch teams. And so these are the moments when you see that kind of execution. You can, I think Gasol played a big part as a communicator, as a guy who would, in those situations, not just yell, but like push a guy over there. Like,
go. I was literally going to say that, Oren. Like, I personally just want to see Baines shove Siakam there, just so we can get in better position. I mean, if you're not going to communicate with your mouth, you might as well communicate with a quick shove and get a guy back in position. But no one really said anything, and it ended up in a dagger.
Yeah, I think the one guy we didn't talk about is Siakam, and quickly I'll say that I thought he was really good tonight. He played 42 minutes, and they have a back-to-back tomorrow. He was the only starter, I think, who was +4. Actually, OG Anunoby was +3. There was a run in the end of the third where Philly kind of picked up the lead, and then Pascal was off the court, and then Pascal came in to start the fourth, and he just started finding his teammates. And the impressive part was that he was finding them in the paint, like under the basket. It wasn't just 3-pointers. Like, he was running in transition, finding guys. He was just dump offs to OG under the basket. So yeah, his playmaking seems to have improved. His ball handling seems to have improved a little bit recently. In transition, he's becoming a little bit better of a playmaker than he was early this season. So I do think he deserves his due because he played pretty well.
No, he does, for sure. And Siakam's another guy. I put up a poll on my Twitter account where I asked Raptors fans what they thought about Toronto's kind of all-star, their prospects in the all-star game, and what kind of chance they had to get in there. The question I essentially asked was, if there's a Raptors All-Star, do you guys think it's going to be Fred VanVleet or is it going to be Pascal Siakam? And I know a lot of people would immediately kind of say Fred VanVleet because he's been kind of the more consistent one throughout the season. But Siakam's been, arguably the Raptors' best player in the last month or so. He's kind of brought up his averages, percentage-wise, and just the typical box score stats. Siakam's done a great job. I think he did really well today. Like you said, he played 42 minutes. So you're probably going to see, Utah and Stanley Johnson and some of the other guys in tomorrow's game. You don't really want Siakam to get burned out, getting into other games. I believe tomorrow's game is it Miami?
Yeah, it's Miami.
Yeah, it's Miami. And that's a game where you're probably going to need Pascal a lot. But again, you could throw in Stanley and Utah. But I quickly, Oren, wanted to get into some topics away kind of from tonight's game. I feel like we've spoken about a bunch of players so far.
Yeah, real quick, I think someone made a good comment in the YouTube comments about the reason we lost this game was we went small at the beginning, which gave 37 points in the quarter. Not all of that was when they were small, but I kind of agree that it was a strange choice for Nurse to start that small when it didn't work last game. The bigger lineups worked better, and he kind of went back to it, which was a little strange to me. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but yeah.
I mean, they did. They started off small, and it's one of those things where I feel like it was working in spurts for Nick Nurse. So it's very hard. I guess it's easy for us to say in hindsight. I mean, we should have had a bigger or smaller lineup out there at certain times in the game. I feel like it was just a game of runs, especially at the end there. I mean, it was consistent, I think, throughout the game where we saw a 10, 15-point lead. Toronto would kind of close it to 7, and then it just balloons right back up to 15. For Toronto, I think, going small, I think is the future for them. This is a team that, you don't really have any other choice. Like we've said on multiple, post-game live shows, Ibaka and Gasol aren't really here anymore. So you don't really have a choice, I should say, to really go big with the lineups anymore. You have Baines, who's 6'10" at most on a good day, 6'10", and he doesn't even really play all that much like he's 6'10" most of the time. He did play well tonight, but I think going small is the future for Toronto for sure. But I wanted to quickly get into, Oren. I wanted to get into something that, a lot of fans don't necessarily, they haven't touched upon this. They haven't really looked into this yet. If you're very active on Raptors Twitter or just NBA Twitter in general, you've been hearing a lot about, a concept, a cool thing going on by the name of NBA Top Shot. If anybody in our live chat knows what I'm talking about, let us know. Oren was asking me, prior to the game, he had no clue what was going on with NBA Top Shot. He kind of wanted an explanation. A quick explanation is it's essentially virtual trading cards. I mean, NBA Top Shot, first of all, is, it's a concept that's licensed by the NBA, it's backed by the NBA, backed by the Players Association. So that kind of, for me, I've been in it for about 4 or 5 weeks now. And for me, that kind of piqued my interest immediately because the first thing I looked for, I kind of thought of was, is this kind of like a scheme going on? What is this thing? A lot of people are making money off of it. Seems very weird. And then once I saw it was backed by the NBA and the Players Association, it kind of piqued my interest. So I've been in it, like I said, for 5 weeks. It's virtual trading cards. Each card is a moment. I have about 35 to 40 moments in my collection. A bunch of people across Raptors Twitter are kind of joining in on the fun. I'm not going to talk about.
You have to buy them? Is there any way?
Yeah. So essentially, there's 2 ways, right, Oren? You can go about this. There are pack drops where you kind of go in a queue. You wait in a long queue, and if you're lucky enough, the queue gets randomized. If you're lucky enough, you get a pack in that drop, and that pack contains 3 moments that are added to your collection. And each of those moments can sell from anywhere from like $20 to, you can get a LaMelo Ball, and LaMelo Ball right now is worth $7,000 US. The last time I checked, he could be down to 5,000 or 6,000.
Like, is every LaMelo moment the same?
Yeah. So LaMelo
value.
So it also goes, there's different types of cards. There's a common card. There are limited edition cards that are minted at about 15,000 per card. So there's only 15,000 total, that you can get all across the world. So that kind of scarcity of the cards kind of interests people. There's some players, I believe Lillard has a card that only has 4,000 cards out there. Some players have cards that only have 99 cards out there. So obviously the more scarce a card or a moment is, the higher value it's going to be. But guys like LaMelo, LeBron are all going for a ton. There's a very active marketplace.
Does LaMelo only have one play, or is there many LaMelo plays?
LaMelo, I believe right now, he has only one moment. It could be one or two, possibly three. I don't really look at LaMelo all that much, to be honest, because he's worth so much.
Yeah.
Like I said, last time I checked, he's worth $7,000. I know I have a friend of a friend who packed a LaMelo moment. And again, this pack was only worth, I believe they were selling it for $14, the entire pack. And he packed a $7,000 moment. So, I mean, the profit there is immediate. Again, it's only in its beta kind of version. So people are still really early on it. Super cool concept, man. It is so much fun. I was talking to Blake Murphy about it earlier today. I gifted him a moment. He's kind of getting his collection started over there. A couple other friends are getting into it. It's cool, man. It's really cool. I'm enjoying it.
People were making a lot of jokes about this Baines play being on it. So will it actually, do you think, like become a moment, or like how do we know?
I mean, so when they do these pack drops, they'll kind of let you know ahead of time what new moments are dropping. You usually won't see a play like that long. Usually moments get split up into either like dunks, assists, 3-pointers.
Was the Ant dunk a moment?
Sorry?
The Ant dunk on Utah, was that a moment?
That hasn't been made a moment yet, but that's almost guaranteed.
Right.
I mean, in the grand scheme of things, to be a moment. There's a bunch of random ones, like a random Lonnie Walker dunk that I have, a LaMarcus Aldridge 3. I have a Troy Brown on the Washington Wizards, I think a layup or something like that. And then I have some other cool ones, which is like Lillard, Trae Young, blah, 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 blah. But it's really cool. If you haven't looked into NBA Top Shot yet, look into it, because it is super cool. If you've ever played NBA 2K and you've played the My Team game mode, it's kind of like that, but you're playing with real money. So it's super, super dope. I enjoy it. Yeah, let us know in the live comments if you've been doing your thing. Oren, I suggest you get on it. I've made a good amount of profit. I'm not going to tell you guys how much, but I've made some good profits on it so far. And again, it's in the beta version, so we're early. Why not join?
Yeah, no, I might get into it. We will see.
I want to get into one more thing, right? Before we end off here. And again, if you're kind of following from the YouTube live show, we apologize for obviously the earlier technical difficulties. We kind of started off midway through. We were about 5 minutes or so into talking. I think you guys caught us when we were talking about Furkan Korkmaz. So we apologize for the technical difficulties there. But so far, I think we've been smooth here. The live chat, I'm looking at it right now. It's pretty active, which is cool to see. I quickly wanted to talk about Chris Finch. We didn't get into him, obviously, on Sunday. I think the news broke Sunday night, was it? Or was it yesterday?
No, it was Sunday after the game.
Yeah, so it was after the game. Minnesota Timberwolves former head coach, now Ryan Saunders, was dismissed. And oddly enough, the Raptors lost, their assistant coach, Chris Finch, who's a guy that before he even got hired by the Raptors, a guy that a lot of teams were interviewing for head coaching positions, a guy that's kind of been there, done that, very respected voice around the league, and offensive. A lot of people think he's an offensive guru. Again, very strange because you're kind of taking an assistant coach midway through the season, kind of poaching him midway through the season. Very strange to see. And it was almost like the Timberwolves, as soon as they tweeted they dismissed Ryan Saunders, they also tweeted that they hired Chris Finch. Very strange. But what did you think about the Chris Finch move? Do you think it's going to be good for him? Do you think we'll see a change maybe in the way Minnesota plays right now, or do you think that's going to take a full off season? What do you think about that move?
Yeah, I haven't thought much about Minnesota, I'm not going to lie. I saw Nikias Duncan wrote for Basketball News.
Yeah,
Nikias Duncan about it. So I haven't read that, but his work's really good. So I would encourage people to check that out. I think it's a tough job in Minnesota because they have some nice prospects, but they're so young and raw that they don't really have an identity or anything like that. And what was I gonna say about Minnesota? They have a really big draft coming up because their
Yeah.
pick is protected 1 through 3. So I thought this was a weird move, and no one's really talked about this, but in the sense that they should be trying to lose as many games as possible so that they can get a top 3 pick and then give their pick to Golden State next year instead of this year. But so I don't really understand firing your coach halfway through the season and getting Chris Finch, because that insinuates that you really want to win. But like if you're really being smart here and playing the long game, you should want to lose this season. And I thought they could have like maybe fired him, had an interim head coach. David Vanderpool was there and people thought he should have got the job. I don't really know much about him. But I thought you could have probably got Finch in the offseason, right? So it is a weird move. As for the Raptors, I'm really curious to see how it's going to affect them, because like obviously we're not going to know now, like one game in, but going forward, like you've worked, you said, on basketball teams. I've done it once. And I couldn't imagine, because, he's not just an assistant coach. He's the offensive coordinator and he's the primary, like #1 assistant coach. So I couldn't really imagine that on like just a regular basketball team to lose that midway through the season. But the Raptors are, they're a bigger organization. They have a lot of organization stability. They have a top down with Masai and Bobby, who are really smart. Lots of smart coaches on that staff, including in the G League right now. So I think they'll be fine, but it'll be interesting to see if the offense, stagnates a little bit at all.
Yeah, for sure. Nick Nurse himself, he addressed it where he kind of said that we're just going to do kind of a reorganization, kind of shuffling around coaches' responsibilities. But he did say that he would be handling most of the offensive duties for the rest of the year. It's just very strange to me because I don't know if Toronto faces Minnesota for the rest of the year. But if they do, it's like at this point, you call out a play.
No, they don't.
Is that okay? Yeah, because I was going to say at this point, you got to change some verbiage in terms of the plays called because, guys like, he ran the offensive system completely for Toronto, and that kind of let Nick Nurse kind of oversee the rest of what was going on. But I'm happy for Chris Finch. Good move for him to move to Minnesota. There are some good pieces there.
The Timberwolves should owe us a second-round pick. We should get their second-round pick this year.
Yeah, there should be some sort of compensation given, especially when you're losing your lead assistant coach. But it was cool to see Chris Finch move on. Another Raptors coach gets poached, so hopefully he has some success there. Nate Bjorkgren kind of left for Indiana, I should say, and is doing a great job over there for their team. Did you want to wrap up with anything else before we kind of close it off here?
No, someone made the point that Brad Stevens, like, where's his coaching tree? Nick Nurse has been a head coach for like 2 years, and he already has a coaching three deep now, including him. So, yeah, Brad Stevens, where are you at? Yeah,
Brad Stevens. It's funny because Boston and Toronto have probably been the most compared teams over the last few years, just because of their similarities in terms of like Jason Tatum. They have very good wing players over there, very good coach in Brad Stevens, but Nick Nurse is better. So we'll move on. We're going to close it off here, guys. Again, we apologize for any technical difficulties to start off the stream if you're watching from YouTube. If you're watching from Twitter and you stayed with us from the beginning to the end, we've been here from the get-go. So we obviously thank you guys for being there. We're going to close it off here. So thank you guys for joining us. This was a very, very good one for the wrap-up, your Raptors Republic post-game live show, where unfortunately your Toronto Raptors came up with a loss versus the Philadelphia 76ers. And I am your co-host, Sahal Abdi, again here with Oren Weisfeld. So thank you for staying with us. We'll see you again tomorrow versus Miami. Get us to 100 likes, guys. Please get us to 100 likes. We're trying to get there. I believe we almost got there for the last one. So
get the last one. Yeah, likes more likely the last one.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks guys for watching.